Hi, welcome to another episode of Toxic Mold Sucks. This is Malachi's Message podcast station and our video podcast. I'm Elizabeth Kripe. I am normally co-hosting with Emily Rochelle. Today I get to do this solo. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Malachi's Message. Today we have an incredible guest. She and I were communicating via email, and I just thought her story was inspiring. I thought the way that she is chosen to incorporate this into how she views her workplace was inspiring and encouraging. And she will be the first to tell you when we talk about her vocation that she is not an expert in how mold and her vocation go together, but I think she's incredibly knowledgeable. And I think that's where a lot of our listeners are at, where they're diving into resources and they're becoming incredibly knowledgeable. So I hope she inspires you. I hope she gives you some new information and helps you look at your mold journey in a little bit of a different way. So I'm going to dive in. This is Bianca Gilmore. She is a doctor of physical therapy who has worked primarily in the pediatric setting. She is also a wife and a mother of two who she enjoys spending as much family time with as possible. Her family has recently been diagnosed with mold toxicity and have only been on their journey of healing from mold for a few months. I think a lot of you are in that same boat. However, Bianca's newfound knowledge of mold and its detrimental effects on the body has sparked a great interest in spreading awareness in both the public and professional communities. Bianca, thank you so much. I know I've said it before, but I'm so excited for this interview. I just appreciate you taking time out of your day to share your story with us.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. Your introduction and make me feel so special. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
So I know that you have, sorry, I need to cut you off. I'm really excited. I know that you shared with me through our emails just kind of a little bit about your mold story, but nobody else has seen those emails. So would you mind sharing with everybody that's going to be listening to this a little bit about first what your life was like before mold, and then dive into how your mold journey started?
Sure. Gosh, this question is always like, okay, where do we start? So similar to probably a lot of the other stories of individuals who've been on the podcast, we were a family of, three at the time. That was a healthy, happy family prior to mold. So my husband, and it was our son at the time. He was 3 years old before we encountered mold. We were just the three of us, and we were able to go out into the world, eat at a restaurant, sit through an entire meal together. Prior to mold, we could exercise regularly, no problem. Sleep wasn't an issue. I mean, we were probably looked like a typical family. And but I would also say prior to mold, we took a lot more for granted. After mold, kind of priorities changed, and we realized how important some things are. But I will try not to tail off too much before I get into that. So I'll kind of share a little bit about how all of this happened. So my husband and my son and we had moved into a rental home at the end of 2020. I was actually pregnant with my second son at that time. And shortly after we moved, our second was born. So for him, he lived the first 18 months in mold, 18 months of his life in mold, and we didn't know. But anyway, we had moved into a new home, and for us at the time, it was just kind of like a miracle. It was right at the end of 2020, after the whole entire world had been flipped upside down, right? It wasn't just us, it was everybody. Everybody's life had changed because of what was going on in the world. And at that time, my husband and I, we had moved from where we were living previously. We moved cities because the pandemic had changed our jobs. We weren't able to continue working where we had worked previously. We moved. I was pregnant. We were kind of in a place of like, man, we don't really know what's going to happen. Came to just live with family for a little while. And then it was like, we found this home to live in, and it was like, oh my gosh, okay, now life is getting started again. It was, to us, seemed like a dream. And everything was just, it was like, okay, we're excited to move forward from everything that happened. Well, pretty quickly after we lived in that home, I would say it was probably only maybe 2 months, our oldest son started to show some signs of just what we knew, that there was something going on. He was having some challenges. At first we kind of thought like, okay, he's a toddler. It's just being a toddler, right? And actually a lot of people told us that. Oh, he's just a toddler, and toddlers have tantrums and toddlers scream, which they do. But my son's was different. So he was typically developing. As you mentioned, I'm a pediatric physical therapist, so I know the milestones. It was like
Yeah.
physical development, and I was very much making sure that my son was on time and everything was good. And the doctors always confirmed that he was typically developing in all of his milestones. In fact, he was even early in some things like speech. And come like 2 months, like after we were in that home, I started to see a regression in his skills. So he was able to communicate with us. He was able to tell us, what he needed. And all of a sudden, it was like he couldn't tell us what was wrong. He would have these bouts of just screaming, like he couldn't tell us. There was nothing could come out of his mouth except screaming, and we didn't know what was going on. I mean, it was like a switch flipped, and all of a sudden he's screaming. All he could do is scream. He was using utensils, and he stopped. His fine motor skills started to regress. His speech development seemed like it was pausing. And then there were all these other things that was happening. His sleep was being disrupted. He was waking up in the middle of the night with so much anxiety, again, screaming. Um, he almost stopped eating it was like he was not eating anything anymore. And then we started to see OCD type behavior. Like, for example, if there were wrinkles in the sheets, it bothered him so much. And then I started to see, or I recognized that he was also having difficulty with some sensory processing. So certain textures were bothering him. Um, Noises started to be overwhelming, loud noises. He complained of the lights being too bright. The sun, he would say, the sun is too bright. Can you cool it down? He would started to socks, like for example, the seam on socks, he couldn't stand. Sometimes he could handle zipper, sometimes he couldn't. And then my husband and I started noticing what we call in therapy stimming behavior. So, flapping of the hands. My son started to be really interested in things that spin, like fans or the washing machine. He could stand in front of a fan for like 30 minutes just watching the fans. And in my gut at that point, I knew, okay, something's going on, because he didn't used to do this.
Yeah.
He didn't have these type of behaviors before. And in my experience, I've seen those type of behaviors, and they're common to children who are diagnosed with autism. But in my gut, I said, okay, but this isn't right, because he's regressing. Um, this I don't believe that my son has autism, and it wasn't all the time. These behaviors didn't happen all the time. It was like he would have bouts of nothing, and then long bouts of just all of these challenges. Um, and so it was really a challenge for my husband and I, because my husband was like, okay, well, he's a toddler, so this is what he does, right? This is what toddlers do. This is they're our first child. We don't know. We haven't been through this. They scream, they test the limits, right? And I would say, yeah, but this is not, I don't think this is right. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think there's something wrong. And then we started to get other people noticing that something was happening. Um, and so it really all started with our son. And after being in the home for, let's see, over a year, actually, it was probably maybe 14 months. We came to a point where my husband and I said, okay, I think we're going to have to seek help. We're going to have to ask, we're going to have to look for an answer. And that's when I reached out to my son's pediatrician and said, hey, we've been having some challenges here. Maybe my son needs speech therapy. I'm not really sure, but he's really having a hard time communicating with us. And I started to list some of the things, the symptoms, and the pediatrician asked some more questions. And when I guess they had enough information, the pediatrician said, I think that your son's brain is inflamed.
Are
So
are you serious though? They
yes.
didn't just they didn't just try and diagnose it as something. They actually looked at what the root was.
Yes. So
That's incredible.
this is the thing is all of this going through mold has been one of the most difficult challenges my family's ever been through. But there's been a lot of beauty in the challenge that we've been through, and there's been a lot of little miracles. And that's one of the miracles, is that my son's pediatrician, who he had seen from infancy, knew about this. My son's pediatrician knew about mold illness and knew about something called pandas, which I, as a physical therapist, had never heard of. Um, so, yes, so the pediatrician said, I think your son's brain is inflamed. And I said, you mean encephalitis? Because that's what I know it as. And and
Right.
so immediately I'm thinking, oh, we got to go to the emergency room. Like, this is a big deal. Something is wrong. So this is, I know. And I remember we got this came through an email, and it came at like 4 o'clock on a Friday, and the pediatrician's office closes at 4:30. So I'm frantically on the phone trying to get a hold of somebody, and of course, the lines are all blocked, and I didn't get through, and I left a message. So my husband and I, it was the longest weekend ever, where we are waiting to see what we're supposed to do, what comes next. And of course, Mama Bear me is looking for all the research, like, what is this pandas thing? And it was very confusing to me, because it was, when you look up, anytime you go onto the internet, you're going to get a ton of different information, right? You have to be very careful with the internet. But I was finding that pandas can be caused by strep. And I'm thinking, okay, when did our son ever have strep throat? I don't remember him having strep throat. And it was just like, we were like, oh, we don't know. Do we need to go to the emergency room? It didn't seem like an emergent email. And finally, come Monday, the pediatrician's office called us back and said, no, you don't need to take him to the emergency room, but we do need to talk to you about some things. And that's where they started to ask us, has he ever had strep throat? Has he been bitten by insects? And the only thing I could think of was like fire ants and mosquitoes. And then they said, has he ever been exposed to mold? And we said, well, to our knowledge, no. And they said, why don't we just go ahead and test your house? Let's just test your house. And we'd like to do some lab tests on your son too, to see if we can figure out what's going on. So they had us pick up what's called a Hertz Me Too test. And if I understand correctly, it's very similar to the ERMI. And it tests for 5 big mold groups that produced toxic mold, or the mycotoxins. And I remember my husband opening it. He's like, "This is like a Swiffer pad, you know. What is this?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's what the doctor told us to do, so let's just do it." So, my husband, he goes around the house and follows the instructions, and swipes it around, gets it all dusty and dirty, and we send it in. And at that point, we're thinking like, no, it's not. We don't have mold in our home. There's no way that we can have mold. Like, we don't see anything. There's no history of water damage that we know of. There's no water damage that we can find. There's no way. And probably about, I would say, like a week and a half later, we get the results back in our email, and it's like in the red zone. You've got mold in your home, and it's recommended that you leave. And so we're saying, what? Like, are you? No, something has to be wrong. How can there possibly be mold in this home? And so long story short, it turned out that the house did have mold. And it turns out that it wasn't just my son that was sick, but it turns out that all of us were sick, all four of us. And we didn't know.
So at this time, your son was how old when you got the results?
He was 3.
He was 3 when you got the results. So you were in this home dealing with everything you just stated, trying to wade through all of this with him, and you had a newborn at the same time?
Yes. So at the time that we got the results, my youngest was now, let's see, 13, 14 months. He'd already had his first birthday. But looking back, I now see that my youngest was born into mold. That's all his body had encountered for the first 18 months of his life. And so when we look back at just that first year, yes, my oldest, was having a lot of problems behaviorally, regression in his skills, communication, just a lot there. But then we saw that our youngest was also having problems as a newborn. He wasn't able to tell us, but he had chronic inflammation in his eustachian tubes, and he had fluid in his ears. Therefore, he was not able to hear, and his speech delayed. He did not ever sleep through the night. And everybody says like, well, that's a newborn, and then 5 months, 6 months pass, and they're like, well, that now you just need to sleep train him. Then a year comes, and they say, well, you need to just let him cry. And now we're at 2 years, and he still does not sleep through the night. But we realize now that probably he could have been in pain, but also from our own research and what the doctors have explained to us is that mold affects your melatonin levels. It affects lots of different hormones. And so he wasn't sleeping probably because his body was trying to fight something off. But he had also a chronic congestion. He was very frequently congested. It was really hard for him to get over things. And we asked the question a lot, like, gosh, what's going on? And we were trying to do all of the things, right? Feed him good food and support his immune system. However, though, surprisingly enough, his fine motor and gross motor skills developed normally. So other than his speech, he looked like a normally developing child. And so we really didn't notice until his speech was not coming along. And at a year, I started asking the doctor questions. And at that point, it was like, well, it's okay, give it a little bit more time. kids develop at different rates. Then at 15 months, I was like, okay, but he's still not talking, you know? So they said, okay, go get his ears checked, go have him a hearing test. He failed the hearing test. And then by the time his 18-month checkup came around, we knew that we were living in mold. And the doctor said, this is probably what's going on. So we need to treat him for that.
I entirely feel you on that. My youngest was born. We look back now in the apartment we lived in where we knew there was mold eventually. The first place that we lived before that, we look back and we go, there had to have been so much mold in there. And she was born into that. The first apartment, she was born into that. And when we moved into the second one, the same thing. She looked fine. She was meeting most of her markers, but when she started to talk, or when she should have started to talk, she would just make moaning sounds. And she couldn't get the words out at all. And then she started actually like walking into walls. And same thing, we saw neurologists, we saw people for the ENT, and that's when we started to piece it together too. But it's hard, right? As a mom, like it's so hard because you're trying to find the answers. And with your background in medical field as well, you're probably thinking, I'm doing everything right. Like I'm taking the right steps to try and fix this and to try and find the answers. Why isn't this working?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think too, as a parent, that I strongly believe in human intuition, that God gave us intuition, and especially as a parent and as a mother, there's something in your gut that's saying, okay, there's a problem. There's a problem here. I know there's a problem, but I can't figure it out, and nobody has the answer. Like I said, for us, we were blessed that our pediatrician knew about this and recognized it. And I'm so thankful because I've listened to the stories on the podcast and listened to people who lived in mold for years, 4 years, 5 years, and we had 18 months. But I actually also do wonder if we had lived in mold previously, because we lived in apartments before that. And looking back at my oldest son and sort of his like development and symptoms and when things might have began, and then looking even at my husband and I and our health, I think that there's a good chance we could have been exposed before. And then when we moved into this home, it was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back. You know, it's like, okay, now there's just really high levels and the body can't handle it anymore. But it is hard as a parent. It is hard as a mother. And then it's also hard when you are reaching out, you're reaching and you're thinking, okay, you're pulling every tool out of the toolbox. Like, I'm really trying here. We're trying to have the best diet. We're trying to make sure that like we go outside and we, like socialize with the kids, or you're trying to be, doing everything you possibly can. And there's still a major problem. And it becomes all consuming because it's impairing the function. It's impairing the daily function of your child's life, and therefore your life as well.
I think that's one thing that, talking to people that have never been through mold, I think that's one of the huge misconceptions, that people just think it's like you get the flu, right? Like it lasts for a few days, it consumes your life for a few days, and you go back to normal life. And those of us that have been through it no, it's just like you have the flu 24/7, and your entire structure of your day and your work and your routines change permanently, and what your focus is changes permanently. And I'm glad you said that, because I think that's such a misconception that people have about those of us that have been through mold and what our life looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and it's kind of like the flu, but but it's like you never know when the symptoms are going to happen. So it's like having a flu that just kind of explodes at random moments. That's what it's kind of like. So you're on high alert all the time because you don't know when it's going to happen.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, we had this scheduled for last week, and I think like an hour before I had to message you and one other person we were going to be interviewing, because my body had one of those explosion flare-ups, and I was like, oh nope, like I can't do this today. I'm sorry, I have to go in. Like I had to go to urgent care, but it just
Yeah.
kind of stops everything. Like did nothing else for the day. Yeah. We do. So I really want to talk to you too about how you've seen this play out in your career. Um, but I need to thank one of our sponsors first, because we would not be able to do any of this without our sponsors. Today, I am thanking our tier 3 sponsor, the Harman Company. The Harman Company is one of our newest sponsors. And at the Harman Company, they know manufacturing equipment. For more than 6 decades, they have provided products, value engineering, and support to get your equipment to perform flawlessly. With their large inventory centrally located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, they provide high-quality components to manufacturers in a wide variety of industries. You can learn more at the www.harmanco.com. And you do have to type it in that way, or you will be taken to an entirely different company. I learned that the hard way. So you guys are still in it right now, right, Bianca? You guys are still where, if you could quickly tell us where you're at in your journey, and then I want to dive into how you saw this play into your world of physical therapy.
Sure. So we're still in the mold journey. We're no longer living in mold. We once we realized the reality of how dangerous it was for all of us, and especially for our children, we said, okay, we've got to move. We've got to leave. Um, we were blessed with very good landlords who understood, and they actually hired a mold inspector to see if they could figure out what's going on. But that mold inspector ended up coming back saying that there were normal levels of mold in the home and that it was not dangerous. But we knew it was dangerous for us, so our landlords were like, hey, we understand, you've got to go. And so that was a blessing too. We're no longer living in the mold. We haven't yet found a new place to live, but we are blessed with family who's willing to take us in a second time to house us while we figure out what we're going to do. But we are very much in the trenches of healing. So my children, they had to be on a medication to help their bodies detox. It turns out that they are part of the 25% of the world that has a genetic predisposition to being more sensitive, and they cannot detox on their own. But now we're in a place where we're doing a lot of supplements, changing. We had to completely change diet, completely change a lot of things. We're looking at how toxins in food and in shampoos, right? It just everything changes.
Yeah.
Everything changes, and so that's where we are right now. We are. I think I read some. I think it was your post maybe that talked about your budget for supplements. We have one of those too, and we have supplements, budgets, and in fact, we actually have okay. So what can we give up this month so that we can buy supplements? What can we do? Because mold has completely changed, flipped our life upside down. I think, like many other stories, we had to get rid of 90% of our belongings because of that. And we sold a lot of our other belongings that we could have kept that were cleanable, and that we cleaned because we just financially needed that to pay for the doctor's appointments and buy the supplements and things that my children need and that my husband and I need too. We know that we are, we were sick. We're sick too. But as parents, you focus everything on the kids first, right? And then you put yourself behind. But my husband and I are working towards being able to see a doctor and get healthy ourselves, because you can't help your kids if you're having a hard time yourself, right? So where we are right now is we're trying to heal, and it's a very up and down slope. It's not a straight incline by any means. And I mentioned like the flu. It's like a flu where that's a bomb. You never know what's going to go off. That's kind of how it is for us. Some days, my son, my oldest, he's really well. In fact, we've seen a lot of improvements. He's laughing again. He's using utensils. He's eating. He's gone a little bit up on his weight in his growth chart. But then there are still days where he kind of has a tough time, and there's lots of screaming. There's lots of difficulty with communicating. There's still some sensory processing challenges. And so that's kind of where we are. We're in the middle of it. And so it's a good thing that we're out. Not everybody can get out of the molds. We're thankful that we could. But we are sort of still figuring things out. We're still trudging through the mud, traversing what could it be? What's going on? Okay, we think we tackled this one thing. Now there's this other thing. Now opens mold is like, it's like the Trojan horse, right? So
yeah,
mold sneaks into the body, right? And then it opens the door for all these other things to invade. And that's what we're learning. We're dealing with is not just mold anymore, because mold suppresses the immune system, and mold impacts your hormone levels. Right. So you have something called melanocyte stimulating hormone that's key to our immune system. We have antidiuretic hormone, right, that balances out the water in our body. We have even just like, right, it's just even to like your estrogen levels and your testosterone levels and your thyroid function. Mold permeates every part of your body and therefore suppresses your immune system and opens the door wide for everything else. And now bacterial infections that you could usually fight off are not being fought off, and they're running rampant. Viruses, parasites. I mean, you're talking about all these things. And so it's like the Trojan horse came in, opened the door for everything. And now one by one, step by step, you've got to battle it. And that's kind of where we are. We are taking down the Trojan horse and everything else it brought with it.
I love that though. I love that that's your perspective right now, that you're taking it down. Like you guys, you can hear it in your voice too. Like you're actively trying to take the steps. You might be tired, but you're actively doing it. That's honestly, that's admirable, because a lot of people don't, it's really hard to get to that point, and no judgment at all, because you're so exhausted and your body is so exhausted. Right. But I think that's incredibly admirable. So you're doing great. Oh my goodness. When I read your story, I was like, oh, this mama is a warrior. Like I want to meet her. Like she's doing it right now. You're in the middle of it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I don't always feel that way, because you're right. Some days I'm very tired, but thank you.
Yeah.
It's we are the ones that advocate for our children, for our families. So
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. How did you, okay, so I know we talked about this and it was very intriguing to me. So you started to look back at some of your past clients or patients, right, in your industry, and you started to wonder if maybe there was a connection there. What process did you go through? We'll just end with that, but what kind of process have you gone through with your work and looking at your patients after going through this? Well, you're still in it. So going through your mold journey, how did those worlds connect for you?
Yeah. So you mentioned that you've had experience with physical therapists. So, but not everybody might know what a physical therapist is. And so, physical therapists, we are the medical practitioners that are trained in helping individuals restore their function, restore their, movement. We are also help with chronic pain, decreasing chronic pain. We help in even preventing disability. So a lot of people know physical therapists as like the mean ones that make them move after, like a shoulder surgery or a knee replacement or something like that. Well, we actually work in all different areas, and I myself work primarily in pediatrics. So a lot of the patients that I have seen are patients who have congenital disorders. They were born with something, or genetic disorders, but also we work with a lot of patients that have been diagnosed with autism. And so I started to look back at some of my patients and think, man, specifically in this world of autism, ADHD, Asperger's, these social disorders, right? So that also come with physical disability, in the sense that like they may be developmentally delayed, which is why they're seeing physical therapy. Looking back at my patients and thinking, man, okay, well, could there have been something else going on, like mold? Could there have been something in these patients' environment? So some children may have a diagnosis, and you can find, something that happened in their life. There was maybe a trauma at birth. There's a physical change in the brain, and you see, okay, well, this is why they're having this challenge that has led to the diagnosis of autism. But there were other children that I remember the parents telling me, like my daughter, she was she was fine, and then when she turned 5, it's like she started having all these problems, and some days she's okay and some days she's not, and some days she just needs to, like, you know, swing really fast on a swing, or she's ramming herself into the wall. And we recognize that as, okay, there's a sensory challenge here, okay, there's a sensory something or other. But that child has also been diagnosed with autism. And and so from a physical therapist perspective, we're looking at, okay, like, what's the sensory issue, what's the physical, and maybe they're having a hard time with running, or they have poor balance, they have poor coordination. That we see that a lot in children that have this diagnosis. And so we're usually looking at those deficits, right? But one thing that we know in physical therapy, and especially pediatrics, is that you have to really listen to the parents. They are the key to telling you, like, what might be going on or what's happening. And I look back at those patients and think, oh my gosh, was there something in their environment? Was there something like molds? Uh, and I thought, why don't we ask this? Why are we not educated and trained to look at this? Children who had maybe a really a difficult time healing from an injury. Why are they having such a hard time healing? Most people are going to say, like, okay, well, their diet needs to improve, or this needs to improve. Well, if you do that and you're checking off all the boxes and still there's nothing, they're still having a problem. Okay, then it's like, okay, well, we need to look beyond, outside the box. We need to look at what else is going on. And in physical therapy, every time we see a new patient, we do something that's called an evaluation. And so you ask the patient a series of questions. You look at what's going on. If the problem is pain, you're looking at where the pain can be. If the problem is, I can't move my leg very well, you're looking at the function of the limb, or part of their body. But in the interview, you ask questions, including questions about their environment. But usually we ask, like, do you have a 1-story home or a 2-story home? Do you have stairs or a curb, that you've got to get up? How big is your car? Because we're thinking, what obstacles in the environment are they going to have to get around? So we ask those type of environmental questions. What kind of job do you have? What is your daily activity? But I look back and I think, okay, so why don't we ask, what year was your home built? And
Yeah.
has your home ever had water damage? When did anything change in your life when you started noticing a difference in your health? Did you move? Did you, was there an accident? Why don't we ask these questions? Why aren't we trained to ask these questions? Because they matter. And it could really give us keys into maybe something else that's going on for the patient, something like mold. Or as I've been doing research, I realize there are so many different environmental toxins. We've got mold, you have Lyme's disease, you have different bacteria and viruses and things that are actually out there everywhere, but we don't really kind of give them recognition, and therefore we're all practicing to the best of our knowledge and to the best of our education. But if we are not educated, then we could be missing something that's really important to a person's healing. As physical therapists, we are trying to help individuals heal. We are trying to improve their quality of life. That is why we do what we do. It is our goal. And if we don't have a piece of the puzzle, then sometimes we're actually doing things. It feels like you could be just walking in a circle. We also have to be careful that we're not doing something that could even hurt somebody more than help them. Because, as I mentioned before, mold, that Trojan horse, opens the doorway to a lot of different things. And we may not realize that some of the things that we are prescribing or wanting to try and do could actually hurt somebody more than help them. It's kind of, I guess it's sort of like a long answer to your question, but like
No,
I could go on about this because I look back and I'm like, gosh, I wish I could go back and find those parents and say, hey, look, have you checked your house for mold? Like every time I talk to somebody now and they're like, gosh, I moved and I started having this crazy debilitating back pain. I'm like, did you look for mold? Or, like, or somebody's like, I started having, like, I don't know. The doctors are saying my kidneys are having problems and I don't know. Did you look for mold? Just check for it. I'm just saying, like, I'm not saying that that's a problem, but I'm just saying, just check for it.
yes. Like, or schools too. I wonder if some of them, because we've seen so many kids go up to a new campus, and that campus, especially in Texas, is toxic.
Yes.
And we've heard more stories too, of like, yeah, I don't know why my kids start junior high and all of a sudden they're having really hard issues with this. And again, they just chalk it up to, oh, they're preteens. They're becoming teenagers, right? And I'm going, or the school is toxic. Like, I know there was one school here that they were remediating part of one of the classrooms because they actually found out there was mold, which is it was a fight for them to even get to that point. The parents and the people that came in to remediate did it during school hours, during class, and didn't have proper covering up. And I'm like, yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
But again, going, man, I wonder how many of those kids that week, that month went home with like headaches and fatigue and anger and couldn't function properly because of their environment.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're not talking just about schools. We're talking about schools and daycares and after school clubs and,
Gym.
whatever, gyms,
Yeah.
whatever environment that children may be in. And I think too, for physical therapists, I think that we should be aware of this because I think there is the potential that we might be seeing more of this in the future. Um, we right now there's a big push for energy conservation, and it's a good thing. But at the same time, that technology that comes with it is sometimes can promote mold growth. For example, right, like everybody wants the double pane windows in the home, right? They want to seal the inside and seal the outside. And that's great. You're conserving energy, but you're decreasing airflow through the building now, right? So you're decreasing airflow in the home, you're decreasing airflow in the workplace, you're decreasing airflow, you're decreasing that cycling of the outside air and the inside air. And you're just kind of, it's like an airplane, right? Like an airplane is sealed in and you're recycling the air. And if there is water damage, if there is mold somewhere, you're just recycling it. And the mold is, there's not that air to come in and dry it up, right? And so with the new technology and you know, the even just like remodeling a home, for example, or especially in places like Texas, like Houston, that are so humid, has that is prone to flooding, right? You those things, I think that um, us, the physical therapists and the medical community, really should be a little bit more aware of and think about it a little bit more, because I think that we could be seeing more of it. I mean, look at just all the rain that we got, right? Like in the past
My goodness. Yeah.
like week. Or I mean, in Dallas was, I think Dallas had flooding recently,
It
and
did.
so it's just important for us, and even too, like for example, the geriatric community. So looking at a population who's not as mobile anymore, and they might be just in the home, right? They're just in their homes the majority of the time. And if they are not, if you're not aware of, if they're not aware of water damage, or they're not getting out and getting the fresh air, and they're not circulating the air through their homes, for the geriatric community, that's something that we really need to think about. For pediatrics, for those developing, it's really every community, because we're all inside a building at some point, right? Whether you're at the grocery store, whether you're going to work, you live in a home, we are all inside. And therefore, we all have the potential to be exposed to it.
I feel like I could just keep talking to you, but I know we've got to stop at some point. But I thank you. I appreciated too that you clarified what a physical therapist was, because you're right. I unfortunately, the first time I experienced it was in high school due to some sports injuries, and my physical therapist was very cool, but he worked with athletes, but he also knew that, the polite name for him was physical torture. And then as an adult now, I realized, oh, like you really are here to like try to help my body heal. You're not here to just torture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Still see him once in a while around.
Yeah.
I visit home and I'm like, hey, thanks for helping my body heal. I'm sorry I was so mean to you.
Yeah.
But
Healing is painful sometimes, right? The healing is painful. And I think when you go through mold, you understand that in more than one way. So,
yes,
yeah.
yes. Thank you so much, Bianca. I'm sure I'd love to have you come back on in a year or two again and see where you guys are at, because I really wanted people to hear somebody in the middle of it still too. That's such a hard place to be. But we talk about wanting people to not feel alone and not crazy. And it's always really nice to hear somebody on the outside of it that's been through the hard stuff already, but it's really hard to relate sometimes. And you still oftentimes feel alone. So I think people hearing your story and how you're still trying to create like pockets of hope for you and your family, and still trying to spread awareness while you're in it, I think that's going to be so encouraging and help people not feel as alone, because it can get really lonely. So thank you so much for being willing to jump in and share it.
Well, thank you for having me. I think that, like you just mentioned, going through mold is a very isolating and it's a lonely process. And if my story, I can just let even just one person know that they're not alone, then it's been all worth it. Because yes, I think that one of the biggest things that we could do in spreading awareness is also creating community. And that's something that Malachi's Message is doing. I don't know personally anybody who's been through mold, but through the podcast that you have and the foundation that you have, I've been able to hear their stories and realize, A, I'm not crazy, and B, I'm not alone. So we're not alone. So no, thank you for the opportunity to share my story and to hopefully give somebody else hope.
Bye.